if your target audience is the West, right, and you want them to understand that there's gross human rights violations, free speech violations, whatever you want to call it, these are things that are near and dear to the hearts of everybody who lives in the United States.
Mm.
You say something about free speech, you say something about you can't say that,
Mm.
and they're are automatically they're in uproar. They can't.
Mm.
That is, it's not even fathomable that somebody's speech should be restricted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if you play to the emotions, and you know that people feel this way, you play to their political views on this topic, and you can, if your journalism is good, you should be able to adequately show that these people were killed for such things,
Mm.
that there was no violence, there was no, like I think in Saudi Arabia they're perpetuating this story of that Sheikh Nimr orchestrated the attack on some security guards or something like that. I mean, you'd have to essentially debunk these answers
Mm-hmm.
to the question, right? Because everybody will say, "Oh, national security." Every unjust government uses that justification whenever it suits them, right? Even if it's not the case, they say, "Oh, national security. We had to do it. We had no choice."
Mm-hmm.
And so people have been conditioned to just accept that. Oh, well, it was a national security issue. It must have been serious. It must have been something that they had to do. So how do you? I guess the question is, how do you get to the bottom of it? How do you figure it out what exactly happened? That kind of the chain of events um, that led to where we are,
Okay, thank
and
you.
how do you show it to people? I guess, yeah.
All right, thank you again for giving us this honor to have you in this episode of the conference. That
It's
was
my pleasure.
yeah, that was a huge pleasure for us too.
Well, as much as Western leaders try to say that they oppose ISIS and they oppose the African wing of ISIS, Boko Haram, this isn't completely true. Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, refused to list Boko Haram as a terrorist organization. She actually officially said that it should not be considered a terrorist organization. She claimed that calling Boko Haram a terrorist organization would somehow be allowing the Nigerian government to violate human rights or something like that. It's actually China that has championed the fight against Boko Haram, interestingly. China donated a warship to the government of Nigeria and has been trying to get the Nigerian government to fight Boko Haram. But it's clear to anyone who pays any attention that Boko Haram has a lot of support on the local level. A lot of local levels of the Nigerian government are supporting Boko Haram. And they saw the message of Sheikh Zakzaky as a threat. Because Sheikh Zakzaky, though he was a Shia Muslim, was not calling for the slaughter of the Sunnis. He was not calling for the slaughter of the Christians. He was calling for unity of the people of Nigeria to fight for justice. And that was his vision. Very similar to the call being put out by the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Khamenei, standing with the oppressed anywhere in the world, no matter what their religious background or beliefs. I mean, that's the message of the Islamic Revolution of Iran, and that was the message that Sheikh Zakzaky has been spreading. It's not a message of sectarian hate. And for a long time, the U.S. And Israel and other forces have been trying to foment sectarian warfare in Nigeria between Christians and Muslims. And they've done it in the past. Several decades ago, there was a very, very ugly war of Christians and Muslims in Nigeria just slaughtering each other. And now, as Nigeria remains an oil exporting country, and as there's a chance that it could be getting slightly closer to China and is developing a bigger relationship with China, because of that, there is a desire on some parts of the wealthy forces that run the world to further divide Nigeria, and Boko Haram plays a key role in that. Boko Haram, ISIS, these forces spread sectarianism and division, which leads to war and death and destruction, which then makes sure that the forces of wealth and power, the big bankers in the West, can keep control of the world. If countries don't develop, then they become dependent on the West. They have to buy all their supplies and goods from the West, and they basically become servants, and that's what they want. They fear independent economic development. And as China is investing in Nigeria, building hospitals, building schools, and trying to push Nigeria in a more independent direction, the forces of wealth and power very much want to foment some kind of sectarian war. And part of that is Boko Haram. And then one big barrier to sectarianism and division in Nigerian society, of course, is Sheikh Zakzaky and his Islamic movement in Nigeria. Well, it wasn't only in Nigeria that Sheikh Zakzaky had support. he had followers all across the region. I mean, in Central Africa, he had supporters, and he was respected all around the world. I know when I visited the Islamic Republic of Iran for the New Horizon Conference, I was very surprised to see how many Africans were in Iran studying at the seminaries and other places, learning about Islam and learning the traditions of the Islamic Revolution. And I think that a lot of African people, not all of them sharing the religious beliefs of the Shia branch of Islam, but a lot of African people of all different backgrounds and religious perspectives look to Iran as a model, as something to follow, because they see Iran as a country that kicked out the Western bankers, seized control of its natural resources, and began a course of independent economic development. They had a revolution against capitalism, in which they utilized and strengthened the traditions and the religious beliefs that have defined the Iranian nation for so long. And they built them up, and they have a very prosperous society. And they have a very peaceful society compared to the rest of the region, from Syria to Iraq, Afghanistan. Iran is one of the most peaceful and stable parts of that entire region. And that is due to the fact that they have independence, they have economic development, and they have achieved national liberation. And that is something that a lot of African countries are striving for. And so they look to Iran as an example. And the Islamic movement in Nigeria, led by Sheikh Zakzaky, is very much an expression of that. It's Africans who look to Shia Islam and the example of the Islamic Revolution and the teachings of Imam Khomeini and Supreme Leader Khamenei. They look to that as an inspiration as they fight to free their own country. And I think that that is what the Zionists are very afraid of. They know that Iran has already broken free, but they don't want the ideas that defined the Iranian Revolution to spread. They don't want people to know that they can be free and break free. And that's something they're very afraid of. And I think that the execution of Nimr al-Nimr and the slaughter of the people in Zaria and the continued detention of Sheikh Zakzaky are connected. It didn't just randomly all happen that in the month of December they decided to attack Shia Muslims in 2 different countries. And I frankly think that the Saudi bombing of Yemen is also linked to it, because that's another revolutionary movement, Ansar Allah. It's all connected. There is an effort to suppress the Shia revolutionaries around the world because they are the forces calling for unity of Christians and Muslims. They're calling for independent economic development. They see Islam not as an ideology of maintaining the status quo and obedience. They see Islam as a revolutionary ideology that is about spreading justice throughout the world. And that's what they're very threatened by. And I think that the rise of groups like Boko Haram and the wider, ISIS phenomenon and Takfiriism are also a response to the fact that many people throughout the world are looking to Iran for inspiration. They are very threatened. The forces of wealth and power are threatened by, the revolutionary ideas that are coming out of different parts of the world, many of which are inspired by the Islamic Republic. Well, the current president of Nigeria, Buhari, is a Muslim. It comes after a long time in which the president was Goodluck Jonathan, who himself was he was a Christian. And I think that the goal in Nigeria is to turn Muslims and Christians against each other and divide the country and create chaos. That's what the overall goal is in Nigeria. And I think that the slaughter of Zakzaky, or the slaughter of the Islamic movement in Nigeria and the continued detention of Zakzaky, I think that is overall, it's part of that strategy. I noticed that in New York City, when I spoke to Nigerians, there's a level of just contempt between, Nigerian Christians and Nigerian Muslims. When I tried to talk to many Christian Nigerians about what happened to Zakzaky, people immediately said, well, Zakzaky was part of Boko Haram. And that's, of course, not true. Zakzaky is a great opponent of Boko Haram. But that's the level of distrust and contempt that Nigerian Christians are being taught to have for Nigerian Muslims. And my fear is that with Zakzaky and his message of peace not as strong as it once was, and suffering in the aftermath of this horrendous attack, that there could be further escalation of this, and that Nigeria could be pushed into civil war. And I think that China has a very important role to play, because it'll be up to the Chinese government to try and prevent Nigerian society from crumbling into religious conflict. I think that's going to be very important. I saw that the ruling party of Nigeria just tried to establish relations with the Chinese Communist Party. I think it's the duty of China to tell the Nigerian government that if they want to have peace in their country, they've got to stop supporting Boko Haram, they've got to stop persecuting the Shia Muslims, and that this is a plan from the imperialists. And my hope is that China can push Nigeria in a more independent-minded direction, and it will not continue to fall into this trap of sectarianism and division.
As you already know, in this last week we have witnessed the execution of Sheikh Nimr in Saudi Arabia. Do you see any kind of relation between this massacre of Nigeria and the execution of Sheikh Nimr in Saudi Arabia?
Of course, there is a relation between two things, because the execution of Sheikh Nimr was after a little period of capture and capture of Sheikh Zakzaky and killing the innocent Muslims and Shias in Nigeria.
Yes.
And then the massacre